You're watching the free version of Silhouette Essentials. For projects and footage, head to borisfx.com for the premium download.
And next I want to point out that Silhouette has blending mode options in the Roto object list. For example, this is the column that has the blend modes, and you can cycle through them. And we'll click A to see the alpha. So you can hold things out or arrange them in a way for different compositing operations. So it's really flexible, and you can do this with objects inside a layer or layers themselves. And we can also do a little QCing. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And I'm going to press Shift 0. And that pre-multiplies the image in the viewer by the alpha. And then I can disable the outlines and scrub through. And maybe I'll turn off all the mountains. Shift click all the layers so I can see the ice formations. And it's a quick way to see if there's any bouncing or chattering. And once we're done with our own internal QC, we might want to hand off our mats in a way that others can QC it. And we'll do that next. I'm going to press Shift 0 to get out of that mode. And now we'll get set up for the export process. This time I will demo how one can render out with just shape outlines and or color-filled shapes. So here in the Roto final, I'll show you how you can do that. First, I'm going to make sure that my other layers are turned off just to show you the ice blocks more easily. So if we go down to the output node, actually we're going to be in the Roto final. I'm going to select our layer here. I'm going to unlock it so that we can edit these parameters. And we'll go to the node, properties, and we'll go to the color area. And make sure it's open, and make sure we can see all the parameters there, and click Enable. And now you can see that we have a choice of outline size and fill opacity. So here, if I turn on my shapes, I need to turn on the overlay here. We can edit the size of the outline. Right now it's 0, and you can bring it up to as high as 3. And then for the fill opacity, you can bring that up as well. So it's going to fill the shape with the color of the outline. If shapes are overlapping, the color is just going to be a little bit more intense. So let's just put this at 50%. And we'll set the outline at 2. And now we can turn on our other layers. And you can see that the properties here in the node parameters will take effect for all of the layers inside the Roto object list. So it might seem a little bit too busy, and maybe you just want to render out the layers separately, and you can do that. If I want to render my layers out separately, I have to make sure that I turn off the visibility on the layers that I don't want to render. And then I just set my path accordingly and name my files. And in this case, I think I'm just going to change my render properties a little bit here. I'm going to make my outline size 1 and my opacity a little bit less. Okay, so then I can either render this out, and then if I want to render other layers, I can just disable one and render another, just depending on how I want to group things. But in this case, we'll just leave this with the ice blocks on. So another option, if you don't want to keep rendering out with the same output node and changing the file name, if you want to have more delineation, you can actually render out multiple output nodes at once. So for example, I'm going to duplicate this Roto final node, Command D, so that's a duplication, and hook that up to my source and bring in another output node. I'm selected on my Roto node here and press Tab. output, and then set up my path accordingly. But there's one thing I notice here, and I'm looking down in my sample path here, that I have 3 leading zeros in my file name, and I don't want that. And that is set in the preferences. So we'll change that. And what's new in Silhouette 2023 is that you can access the preferences by this icon up here on the right in the Trees window. And now we can edit it. Let's go up to Render. You can see I have the padding, and I'm going to make the padding 0. Click Apply. And now I won't have any leading zeros. So you just sort of have to click away and go back again. And now you can see I have no leading zeros with my file number. I want to make one more change before we start rendering. I'm going to change the format to JPEG because we don't need an EXR file for a QC. JPEG here. And okay, we're already set to JPEG there. Okay, now we're ready. I'm going to select both output nodes. Click Render, and I'm going to render the selected output nodes. You could also just use all output nodes if they were not selected, but I like to do it with them selected if I have multiple ones, and that way if I have another output node somewhere in my session, that will not be rendered. Okay, and then I think we're set to go, and we'll click Render. And it's going to render them alternately. And then we can bring in our rendered files. I'm double-clicking here in the Sources window to bring up the Media Browser. And bring them into our session. Make a little more room here. Actually, we can just put them below the output nodes. Make our viewer a little bit bigger. And take a look. It's just one option for QCing. And especially easy if you want to hand them off. I hope you've enjoyed this class, and I'll see you in the next one.